confused employees don't generate return on investment. When things get hectic and stressful, and when there's a lot of pressure in the business, sometimes as leaders, we fail to communicate. We fail to keep the pulse on what's going on. We withdraw, we isolate, we surround ourselves by our executive team and end up in the ivory tower. At the same time, the organization, our employees, our teams, our leaders don't understand what's going on. And that vacuum of information, of clarity, is then often filled with fiction, with ambiguity, with politics, especially when expectations are not clarified and roles are not clear, when the strategic direction is not clear, competition. You will see employees competing for resources towards their own direction, starting to build their own fiefdoms even over time. As leaders in organizations, it is our role to translate complexity into clarity. It is our role to create clarity, to communicate clarity. And this is not just a feeling. Clarity is really about systems that and organizational architecture that creates A, clear expectations and a unified direction, and B, an ecosystem of information. On the one hand, as leaders, we have a responsibility to communicate top-down, right? There are certainly aspects or information that we cannot share for obvious reasons. It's too sensitive. If it gets into the hands of competitors, it could be a disadvantage, could be legal challenges. There's certainly confidential information that we cannot share. But we have a responsibility to communicate and to create clarity and to share as much as is reasonable to the organization, to set the tone, to communicate decisions, to make the why clear of why we do what we do, and to really keep people in the loop. Also, as leaders in organizations, it is our role to understand what's actually happening on the ground level and to create an environment in which bottom-up information can flow to us. This literally becomes the oxygen supply of the organization. Too many times, crucial, mission-critical information gets stuck on the frontline levels. Nobody asks for it, or those who spoke up or who raised uncomfortable issues that we might have with our churn rates or with the market might be breaking away. There might be some negative signals about demand. Those who brought that up got penalized, got excluded, or got frowned upon, and they just learned very quickly not to bring up those things anymore. If you end up in a situation like this, then you will inevitably become blindsided. You can still go out and see your role, of course, as the leader who creates clarity, but you will end up getting lost in your own narrative. That will be fed by all the sycophants around you, by all the yes-sayers, and in some cases, you can literally call them toy soldiers. People who cling to their careers, who have built their nests in your company, and who have every incentive in the world not to tell you the truth about what's going on, but instead to stroke your ego and make you feel good. That's a massive risk as a leader. If truth does not travel to you anymore, when was the last time you heard something uncomfortable about your business from your executive team? If it doesn't travel to you anymore, then that's a problem. Why? Because problems by nature always start very small, and you can now intervene and fix it with one tweak. The longer you don't take action on them, and they grow and they grow and they grow, they build roots and branches, and they start entangling themselves with more and more people, with more and more aspects of your business. Once they have grown to a certain size, it takes a massive surgery, sometimes with financial losses, reputational harm, and massive disruptions to your business operations to fix those problems. So if nobody tells you the truth, if you are surrounded by yes-sayers who paint rosy pictures about what's going on in order to look good for themselves and for their own career, you run into systemic business risks. And of course, as a leader who feels responsible for your company, you cannot afford that. So what's the solution? It really starts with ourselves as leaders. How we set the tone as the top manager, as the founder, as the CEO, gives people either permission to speak up, and it becomes the culture, the operating mode to speak up, or they learn very quickly, just by something as simple as a frown on your face, or discomfort when certain topics are raised, when truth is raised, they learn very quickly that's dangerous terrain. Because the messenger always gets shot first, right? The one who brings the bad news. And there are real career risks for employees to actually bring that truth. That's also why in my work, I actually do diagnostics involving the frontline employees, involving all the different operational layers, as well as the strategic layers and the founders, investors, and so forth, to create a full picture. Because due to the human hierarchies, due to social organization, even with the best intentions, it sometimes needs somebody external who's not politically involved in the organization to collect all of this data in order to create a map of reality, because over time, by default, organizations just cut off these information channels for reasons that we just described. It takes a lot of effort and proactivity to reestablish those and create ecosystems of information. And this information exchange cannot happen just in moments. Like the CEO walks into the hallway or has breakfast with the sales team. This kind of clarity, alignment, and an information exchange needs forums, needs formats. The most straightforward one is a dashboard, right? Numbers are a good starting point. Let's always keep in mind, numbers don't tell us the entirety of reality. There are many things you cannot portray on a dashboard, on a spreadsheet in two-dimensional formats. Reality is a bit more complex than that. There are many things that you cannot even measure. But it gives us a starting point for discussions, especially when we benchmark, when we look at metrics, and we all look at the same reality. That's already huge. So data really serves that psychological purpose of allowing a multitude of people to look at a shared reality that at first instance is not really disputable. It is what it is. Now we deal with it. If you take it a step further, right? It's not just the town halls, the all hands and whatnot, because those are fleeting moments. It's really structured debriefs after certain phases, right? Where everybody knows whenever we finish something, there's a debrief session where we sit together for 2 or 3 hours and we debrief everything. That is a format in which truth can surface. Does it even exist in your company, right? Is there debrief after a season? Think about high season, sales season. Is there a debrief after projects, after initiatives? Or are we just hopping on to the next project and keep ourselves endlessly busy, never really reflecting what we're actually doing? And as we are not reflecting or documenting, we're not learning, and that information never travels really across the organization where it could be of value. You typically hire good people. You want a top talent in your company. You spend a lot of money on HR, on recruiters, on maybe internal talent sourcing and recruiting teams. Now, the moment you hired them, you had certain expectations that, of course, they would bring you a return on investment, that they would deliver. But they cannot deliver if they don't have information, if they don't have context, if they don't have clarity. It happens too often that brilliant, talented people start in a company without an onboarding, without a real introduction to anything, without clarity on expectations. They're just told to figure it out. Shadow the senior. Just spend some time with that person there, but they will show you how it works. The problem with this is that anything that you as a leader, as a company, that you do not communicate with clarity, start with expectations, start with roles and responsibilities, start with even goals that are sometimes not communicated. Anything that you don't communicate creates a vacuum, and that vacuum will be filled with speculation and with ambiguity. And that speculation and ambiguity will create friction points later on. This is what slows down your company. You have all these little pockets of ambiguity and lack of clarity. People now fill that with politics, with competing with each other, with trying to figure it out. And why they do that? You're bleeding money. The money that you spend on salary, it's not translating into results. It's translating into people sitting in your office trying to figure out what the hell is going on. That's not effective. And it will ultimately demoralize also good people. Good people, smart people, intelligent people that most likely you're hiring, they have the ability to think. They do not want to be told what to do, which is the end of the thinking, the outcome of the thinking process. They want to be involved in the thinking process. And even though if they're not involved in the sense of that they have a say, at least they want to understand what the thinking process was. What is the why behind the decisions? Why are we doing this? Why does this matter what we do? Just communicating the why on top of the what, it does a great deal in terms of motivation, more than any perks, free gym membership, and ping pong tables and pizza Fridays could ever do. We humans, we crave meaning, we crave purpose. We want to know that what we're doing is meaningful. It's way more motivating than a lot of the basic desires. It can propel humans to unimaginable heights and make the impossible possible. And this is a factor that's also true in the organization. People want to understand why things are the way they are. And this is also a good thinking exercise for us as leaders, to really think about the why, defend the why. Because sometimes we might realize that we don't have a good why and we should probably not do a certain thing or take a certain decision or add an additional initiative to the organization that's already overstretched. Leading your company with why, right? Creating that clarity creates a lot of positive ripple effects. You now have people who think with you instead of just waiting for orders. The what culture, where you only tell them the what, creates order followers. They have no idea what is going on. They just react to what they're being told to do. And you can imagine, whenever you're not hovering over them and on top of them, they will, of course, go the path of least resistance. If you involve people with the why, and if you could even take it a step further, involve them in discussions and get their inputs, you will see a very different level of motivation and ownership. And when we talk about inputs, it's also important to understand, as a leader, I always have the ultimate decision-making authority and also the responsibility over the outcomes. I'm responsible for that decision that I'm taking. If it fails, then it's on me, on my reputation. It looks bad on me. I have to learn from it. I have to do better next time. I'm now under more scrutiny. This is on me. But that doesn't mean that I cannot listen to people's input. When I invite employees, which is very much recommendable, it creates, first of all, two-way communication. And second, it creates clarity for me, because now I'm learning things that I didn't know about the market context, the customer, the frontline context. Then I'm not here to make decisions right now on their behalf on all those micro issues. That's where trust comes in. Otherwise, I made hiring mistakes. But I'm here to take ultimately finally a decision on my strategic level. But I'm comfortable with getting many inputs. It's called consult and decide. I give voice to everybody. I give a room where they can voice it. And this alone creates a level of engagement and also clarity often for employees that's unprecedented with any other means. Like no town hall, no all hands meeting, no breakfast together can compensate for this. Me as an employee, as a mid-level manager, even as a front-end employee, being part of the discussion, giving my inputs, and of course, I'm expected to fall in line with whatever the decision is ultimately. It could be that the CEO, that the manager decides something that I'm not supporting. But in that moment, I'm the employee, I'm the leader, I'm employed. I will fall behind that decision of the leader. But at least I understand, and I will fully support it and full-heartedly execute it. In this moment, I trust. But I also respect and acknowledge and appreciate the fact that I was able to give my inputs to provide context. So now that future decisions, that this context is now with the decision maker, and future decisions can also be enriched by this. And you start seeing people feeling more ownership, people getting involved, people start to think with the company and start thinking in the same direction. That creates unity, that creates shared purpose. And so clarity is not just a luxury, it's not just a feeling. Like clarity is really an umbrella term for alignment, for information, for communication. Clarity becomes really part of the operating system of the company, of the mode, of the way of doing things. And the only people who can really break that ice, the only people who can really put that in motion to create an operating system of clarity are we as leaders. Our front-end employee cannot make those decisions on behalf of the company, cannot create those forums, those dashboards, cannot institute debriefs, strategic debriefs after every initiative or season. That's on us. So also on our, you could say to some degree, imagination, but to our view, to our perspective, to our horizon, to our thinking, to say this is something that we now implement, that we design. Whenever ambiguity stays the way it is, and whenever we fail to create clarity, when we do not take that very serious, we build a lot of blind spots, and those blind spots will haunt us in the mid and long term. There is a systemic risk involved with not wanting to know, with avoiding truth. There's a systemic risk involved with not prioritizing clarity, communication, and alignments. And again, alignment is really about minds thinking in the same direction, understanding how what they are doing in the different functions contributes to the whole. And on the other hand, as a top manager, it is for me also to understand how all those different functions feed into actually a larger strategic vision that I'm pursuing in the long run. And if I manage to incorporate clarity into the organization as a culture, and culture means norms, it means the way of doing things, it actually also increases my company value, my enterprise value. Because if there's clarity, it means the show can also run without me as an owner. Founder-dependent companies get discounts when it comes to valuation. That means their valuation will be calculated lower than companies that actually run as systems, as assets, and that can run without the founder. And to be honest, which founder would, or which top manager would not want to have the strategic bandwidth to actually think about bigger topics? But we need to also understand the people around us in our executive team, our VPs, our directors, sometimes even the C-level, for structural reasons, they might not be the best source of truth, of information, of what's going on in the company. So we need to cast a wider net, and that really comes ultimately down to us designing the systems, designing the processes. And we're the only ones who are in the driver's seat of doing this. We have the mandate, the authority, the agency, and the autonomy to take those decisions. And that's our responsibility, to turn complexity into clarity and thus align the entire commercial organization towards a unified purpose and unified outcomes.